Active sensors send out emissions. Passive sensors do not. Everybody knows a motion detector, right? It's actually a pyroelectric detector. I'll get to that, exactly how it works later. What's another possible passive sensor? Anybody? Got a motion detector. Anybody ever heard of brake wire or trip wire? They don't send out emissions. There is a wire there, but it's pretty much overlooked.
How about a light detector?
What?
Light, the
Light detector?
from dark, when night falls, it kicks on.
Oh, yeah. I thought that was a strange thing. We actually make a day-night sensor. It was described at one time that you put it inside a room and you will know that people, when it goes off, are in that room because they turned the light off, as well as other uses. How about a thermal imager? Very nice. No emissions, but allows you to see what's out in the dark. Those are very expensive. I'm not going to put that down. How about our friend the big ear? Things that actually listen to, as Randy was talking about. He loves them. That's great. He doesn't disturb anybody. He doesn't disturb Bigfoot. But he knows they're there. One other. On active, I should have mentioned cameras with illuminators. They put out an emission. Cameras without illuminators, either during the day or at night, bright moonlight, do not put out an emission. So we can call that a passive. Okay. Let's look at active advantages. The advantage of having an active sensor is you can put more power into it, get greater range. The more power you can put into it, the better detail you can see. An example, the camera with and without the illuminator. With the illuminator, you can see farther away, you can see greater detail. Without it, you're relying on natural, and it doesn't work as well. Disadvantages. You need more power than a passive. It also gives away your position. If whatever you're looking at or trying to sense can detect the emissions. Now, the advantages of a passive. We have no emissions. It's the best thing I know. I really like the ones I work with. The passive ones, because no emissions, people don't know they're there. People. They are harder to detect, of course, because of that. And normally they use less power. We work with 9-volt batteries. The equipment we use usually works with 2 9-volt batteries, sometimes 4 9-volt batteries. We have one transmitter that, without the sensor attached, uses microamps. The battery will actually corrode before the power is used up. That's even if it's transmitting. Okay, disadvantages. Again, we have less detail and we have less range. Now, let's look at some of the workings of some of the different sensors. First off, the brake beam. Think of it as a resettable tripwire. Something that, yes, as I was talking about on the items going through on the conveyor belt, it counts. Or in this case, it would trigger an alarm at the people watching. And then they would say, okay, you know something has broken the beam. Brake beam. You go from 1 to the second. Ideally, the way they work is you have an IR illuminator. It's triggered at a very a frequency of hundreds or up to a few thousand bursts a second. The idea being that you put a small burst out there, you wait a while, put another burst out there, wait a while. It doesn't take as much energy. Batteries last longer. That's what we want. The receiver is set so that when it receives one of these bursts of energy, bursts of illumination, it will then set a timer. It's a very fast timer. If it's not reset before this timer hits 0, it will trigger an alarm if somebody gets in front of the beam. If it gets another illumination, it resets and just keeps going, and it doesn't trigger. Now, here's the secret behind a brake beam. You have a lens. You have to concentrate the illumination. This being a little focal point of the lens. And if you've ever played with lenses, you put it right at the focal point, which means that any point source at that specific spot, when it hits the lens, it comes out as a parallel line. This is a bad thing. I'll get to that in a bit. If you put it behind the focal point, it's a bad thing because then it crosses over in front of the beam, in front of the lens, and it goes all over the place. The best thing to do is to put it just in front of the focal point and you spread your beam going out. Why do you want to spread the beam?
More coverage area.
Right. What happens if you put the beam or the receiver, either one, on something that vibrates or moves? We think of a laser pointer as a great beam. We think of a lousy great beam detector, unless you have a large detector. So what you want to do is spread out the beam. Working on it. Actually, I know what I'm going to do. I just have to work on it. Okay, so if the emitter moves, the detector is still in the cone of illumination. If you have too wide a spread, you lose range. You have too narrow a spread, if it moves, you have a false alarm. So, ideal, small spread, and put the detector so that you know you're about in the middle of the range of the emitter. Hello. Hello. Yeah, I'll ignore it. Now, my friend, any questions on the brake beam, by the way? That's how they work. They're not difficult. There is one problem, and we were, I hate to say this, but we were told about it at work. With good night vision goggles, you can actually see the foliage behind the detector illuminated. Sometimes. So we're working on what frequency of the illuminator will cut that down. Next, seismic detector. Seismic detector is something to, get my mind straight. Something to detect a vibration in the ground. You hear about it all the time on earthquake detection. We actually had used on my company, we sold them to people in park rangers in Hawaii so they can monitor volcanoes. It uses, very simply, a magnet suspended by a spring inside a coil of wire. When the magnet moves, you have a small amount of electricity coming through. You amplify it, you detect it. Oh, you're wrong. I've made up one with, believe it or not, a shaker flashlight. Sounds strange, but they work fine. You suspend the magnet inside the coil. You have an amplifying circuit there. It compares the coil voltage coming out. And if it is different from what it's set, from where it's set, it'll come out with an alarm. The only difference between this one and the one that we make is the geophones, is what we call the suspension in here. It's much more expensive and much more sensitive. Okay. How are we going to use the seismic detector? It's there so when something hits the ground around it, we want the sound or the vibration transmitted to the seismic detector, and we want to be able to tell if something is close. You don't want to use it in mud, that's very bad. Soft soil, not so good either. Hard soil is very good, and on rock, I understand these things don't walk around really soft-footed all the time. So on a rock would be very good. These things will pick up the vibration and will give you a trigger that something is creating. Okay. Now we come down. Oh, any questions about the motion detector, seismic detector? No, okay. Motion detector, it's actually what's called a pyroelectric detector. Back in ancient Greece, they found out that certain substances, when exposed to heat, creates an electrical charge. Inside a pyroelectric detector, which is that little can on the end there, is two small crystals. Those two crystals, if you pass radiation across them, one to the other, you will have a pulse coming off of one and then a negative pulse coming off the other. The pulses are designed so that if you move some kind of radiation across them, the two pulses together will trigger the circuit behind it. The detector is designed so that if small changes in temperature happen, less than 5 degrees centigrade per minute, between the two crystals, they will compensate each other. So you don't have to worry about having, I'll say, morning not detecting, afternoon false alarming, and then in the evening going back to not detecting. But there's a problem. If the detector does not have something that will sweep the radiation across it, then sorry about that. If it doesn't have something to sweep the radiation across it, it won't detect very far out. So we put a lens on the front of it. And again, with the lens, it'll sweep across the front. It'll trigger one, trigger the other, and come out as an alarm. We use what's called a Fresnel lens, which is essentially a lens that would get rid of all the parts that are square. And we have the curved sections left. Now, a lot of people don't realize that if you have a motion detector, it's designed to look up and down. Well, what happens if you don't want to have motion, say rabbit, raccoon, small dog, set this off? You can take a piece of masking tape and put it across the lens, and it will keep it from seeing below that. So if you take believe it or not, take your fingers out, wiggle it in a certain spot that you don't want it to have triggered, and it's still there. You just move the masking tape up a little bit.
So you could like put this on a tree to detect when a Bigfoot comes by, but you don't want to detect deer.
Yeah.
You mask off that part.
Mask off the bottom.
Yeah, where when the deer comes by.
One other specific item on this is they have to be oriented correctly.
Yeah.
The two detectors have to be vertical. Well, most of them will show you how to put them vertical. Now, the one I showed you is made by a specific company. I am not going to show for them, but I do have some information on how to contact them. This, the small quarter size, runs about $23. The Fresnel lens, Fresnel lens, runs about $4 more. If you want to go cheap and dirty, you buy a driveway patrol. You run about $13. The problem with these is they're only on one channel, or one code. But the engineers designed them that way. They can be set so that you can have multiple codes on them, so that you can have multiple units working at the same time. And again, in my copious spare time, I'll get the information out how to change those. It's very simple. But hey, 13 bucks for these.
What's the distance on those?
Those are about 300. Yeah, they say 300 feet. I don't think it'd be more than 150, something like that. There is something you can do to increase that. They use a very small antenna. Take it out, put a piece of wire on there. The frequency it operates on is such that the antenna length is not critical. You know, foot, something like that. Should be fine. I'll talk about the other transmitters I'm working with in a minute. Now, let's get into IR illuminators. We were discussing this before the presentation. Visible light ends about nanometers is a wavelength. Visible light runs up to 800 nanometers. Longer wavelengths, higher into the infrared, you have longer wavelengths. The IR LEDs come generally in 3 different wavelengths. Around 830, 840 nanometers, 880, and 940. If you go and get an illuminator kit, you'll find that you can find either one of those. If you were going to use the Sony night cam and night shot on parking lot patrol, then I would go with the lower one because we don't see that. It's above our eyesight mostly. But if I was actually going after Bigfoot, I worry that he actually may be able to see a little bit farther into the infrared than we can. We stop about 800. He might be able to see the 830, the 840, 850. So I would buy either the 880 or I'm buying, personally, I have some coming in next week. They're at the 940 nanometers, and I'm going to try and see how well it works with the night shot. So, if it does, it works well with the night shot, we can possibly get away from anybody seeing the glow, or any Bigfoot seeing the glow. For sensors to be usable, they need a transmitter and receiver. If you hardwire it into something, the wire can be tripped over, whatever. The stuff I'm looking at, I've found out, researched. Most of them have the range of this. They say 300 feet. That's fine if you want it in close. Might be usable. I have found a company that makes transmitter receiver systems. They make the chips. That's the problem. They don't make the transmitters receivers. Hopefully, if you are capable of doing the soldering yourself, you can make up the transmitter receiver. It's got 8 data inputs. So you can have 8 different sensors hooked up to it. Or they operate on different addresses, same channel, different addresses. You can have this transmitter with 4 sensors, this transmitter on the same address with 4 more on the bottom, say top 4, bottom 4, and you have 2 different places that you can monitor with one receiver. You can also set up the receiver to trigger cameras, lights, so that when something goes through the, say a brake beam, or is detected by the motion detector, then you can turn on the camera and the illuminator. Or leave the camera on and just wait till that happens and turn on the illuminator, the light. The ones, this company called Lynx Technology. These long-range transmitter receivers claim up to 3,000 feet. I personally, last weekend, tested a pair out to 2,000 feet. It was clear line of sight, so I know that 1,000 foot, 500 foot inside, not too bad vegetation, should be fine. I am not going to be making them, but I will put out the information on how to. They're not difficult. Hold off on here for that. So far, any questions on sensors, transmitters, receivers? Nobody. Wow.
Let me throw this in here for everybody. What we're looking at is we're planning an expedition here pretty soon. And using this technology, it will allow us to know when the Bigfoot are actually getting close enough and what direction they're coming. So we can actually move our people around to go where we want to be. So there's a lot of good uses for what we're looking at.
Oh, I do want to throw in something about the motion detector. People think it detects motion. Actually, it doesn't. It looks at the background. It gets used to the background. It detects any change in the background. That's why usually you let it sit. It goes for a couple of minutes just to settle down, get used to the background. Now, the more difference you have between the background and what's going in front of it in terms of giving off radiation, emitting radiation, a thing called emissivity. You don't want to know. The easier it will be to detect. You don't want to put a motion detector toward, say, a fur skin in the background if you expect something with fur to walk in front of it. Ideally, the non-metallic substances, the rocks, or even not plowed soil is much more different from human skin and human hair, but animal hair. That is pretty much an ideal. Plants, not bad. The idea is that it wants to get used to the background, and then it will see any change in the background above a certain point and trigger it. Motion detector is very nice.
How much is it your motion detector?
Well, like I said, this one, if you build it, $23 for the little button. Each one, and $4 for the Fresnel lens. By the way, without the Fresnel lens, they are talking 3 feet. With the Fresnel lens, I've been out to 40 feet. So if you have two of them, one pointing that way, one pointing that way, anything walking within 80 feet, 40 feet that way, 40 feet that way, will be detected. So, that's not bad.
I mean, if you run at a time.
8 per transmitter. How many transmitters do you want to run? Transmitters cost about 40. Transmitter receivers will cost about $40 each to make. These, you can get them for under 15.
I guess a lot of them set up perimeter, right?
I would think. Okay, you don't want to use motion detectors as perimeters. Instead, I would use a breakbeat. Ideally, you set up a transmitter here with a brake beam being shot to from 2 points. A detector here and here hooked up to the transmitter. Then, use another transmitter here with 2 more detectors. This is a scenario. That's 6 brake beams. You can do it with 3 minimum.
But the farther you need to get out, the more you
Yeah, but we're talking probably 40, 50 feet between the emitter and detector on the brake beam. The more you use, the longer you can get out. The additional
They're very skittish, so it'd be hard to get them.
brake beams, they
Yeah, in that area.
that area. Okay, if you have
You don't want to look for a needle in a haystack, you look for a moving needle in a big haystack.
okay, but they like to come into camps, don't they?
Yeah.
Something to be curious about. Also, they like to circle around, right? Take a motion detector and point it out. I can't do that. It circles around the camp outside that. You say, okay, Pete, something's out there. Or you can also add a second receiver, tie in the camera, pointing out, turn it on. Same thing here. If something breaks one of those multiple cameras, those are the expensive parts. The sensors can detect it. We're hoping they don't detect the sensors. I have a lot of faith in motion detectors. The major drawback on any sensor you put out there, as in any piece of equipment, is what steps are you going to take to keep them from noticing it. An example, we sold some equipment to Hungarian Border Patrol. They kept complaining that the rats liked the cables because they had greasy food on their hands when they put the cables down. Rats like the greasy food. Okay. You tried bacon in February, rats. If you're doing bacon and handling these things, it would smell like bacon. Anything that you put out there, you want to try to keep as clean as possible. Not only that, one of the motion detectors, believe it or not, are small enough, and the right size piece of equipment to put them in is a 1/2-inch coupling for PVC pipes. It's not gay big. That's fine, wonderful. I also like to spray paint it. But you need to let the spray paint completely dry and get rid of all the smell. Otherwise, they're going to say, what's that? Yeah. No. I think just washed hands. They're going to know that you're around. Also, I was telling Darren about the transmitters. They're very, very, very low power when they're not transmitting. The The battery, like I said, will corrode before they wear out, or before they use the power on them. So, if you just take, drawback on those, they're not waterproof. Yeah. That's the thought. If you hang them up on a tree and let them sit there for weeks, they'll get used to them. And when they get used to them, then okay, you can come in and attach the sensors or leave the sensors up here. Come out, put a battery in it, get ready for it, and they'll think, oh, it's nothing new, nothing unusual. The seismic sensors will vary. You can bury them out in the yard while you're waiting. Let all the smell go off. You smell like dirt. Okay. The whole idea is if we can put something out there that is so much a part of the background, they will ignore it. When they ignore it, then we can use it to trip cameras, hurt them. I'm working on it. I'm working as hard as I can on these, and we're having them shortly. In a few months. Any other questions? No? Well, the ones that you were left, I hope it helps.
If you would, let's demonstrate your seismic.
Oh, yeah.
Sensor that.
Hold up the receiver.
Yep.
Shake it a little bit. Actually, the whole idea is if you just tap it, it should go up. Oh.
See with these, you can put them
Doesn't take much, does it?
position.
Anybody else want to try that? That's like it. Oh, no. Hold it upright and tap it.
So you can put them further out, know they're coming in.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because, I mean, an 800-pound monkey coming at you, they're going to put enough.
These are adjustable.
Yeah, they move quicker than.
These are the cost of a shaper flashlight, plus I think I figured it out as $5.
What I noticed, I'm curious.